All right, so our first guest on today's Big Blend Radio Quality of Life show is award-winning attorney Ida Abbott, and she's joining us to talk about the principles behind her new book. It's called Retirement by Design, a guided workbook for creating a happy and purposeful future. And it truly is a workbook. A lot of times we get books in, and it's a lot of reading, and the doing part isn't there. But like this is like a total. I almost feel like we need more of her books.
I love that she has purposeful.
Yes.
Like purpose in the title, because I think that's the one thing. Like when you get older and you're about to retire, it's all while you don't serve a purpose anymore. And I think that's the one thing that we all don't want to know or feel is you are no longer necessary.
Oh, exactly.
Well, yeah.
Absolutely.
I hate that.
Everyone, the book Retirement by Design is out now through Ulysses Press, and you can go to Ida's website, idaabbott.com, and, of course, Amazon, all those places. So welcome to the show, Ida. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Hey, we're excited about what you're doing with this, and I know this isn't your first book by far, but I think this is one of those books, like I think we should actually do it when we're looking at, I think all ages. Sometimes we think retirement, if you haven't done it by 30, you're screwed, right? That's it. If you didn't get your retirement plan at that age, you're done. But now we're living longer. I feel like we should have this as something we start off with and we keep reviewing every few years, because it's a workbook. It's something that we can change and mold as we grow.
Well, someone once did a survey or a study and found just a few years ago that people spend more time planning for a 2-week vacation than they do for their retirement. So this is definitely an area where people worry about money if they worry about anything. But what I hope to help people with is what are they going to do every day, once they aren't going to the same job or same career they've had for the last 20, 30, 40 years, sometimes even longer.
And at the same time, you may have the same career for longer, but we may shift careers and change careers.
Sure.
And I think now with longevity of life, right, we're living far longer than, my Nana. And I'm thinking back, it's like they were getting married at 13. Heck no.
Just about. Somebody, yeah. And, it's not unusual for people today to live into their late 80s, 90s, even over 100. And so if you retire, whatever age you are, if you're certainly at kind of the what we call the retirement age, because of Social Security, if you look at mid-60s, you might have 30 or 40 years to go.
Exactly.
That's half of your life right there all over again.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying this is such an important thing. I think it also lets us know if you're younger that you can have more than one career. You can say, hey, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, second part, third part. And I think
I think young people today expect that. I mean, I think the idea of having the same career for your entire working life is really something that nobody expects today. I think that is going to become, or it's on its way to becoming the exception. Or even if you are in the same general discipline, you might have, 6 or 8 or a dozen different jobs or different employees or different ways of doing your work. You might have your own business. You might work for someone else. You might teach. You might go into something else. But, the idea of being at the same job for 40 years, most people just don't do it anymore.
I think it depends on the job. Like, are you in the job that's meant for you? And when you're in the job, that means you're working for somebody else. And how long do you want to work for somebody else? Are you really going to work for somebody else forever? Or at some point, if you're in the job or the subject or the thing that you care about, don't you want to do your own thing? Are you going to break out and do your own thing? And when you get to the point where people think you should retire, maybe that's the time that you break out and do something new.
Well, I think it's I guess it's a funny thing. When I was growing up, and I've got a few years probably on both of you, maybe both of you combined, I don't know. But, the expectation was
way.
you would go
that
into
would
a field and stay
100.
there.
But
the idea was there were certain paths, job paths. There were certain expectations in the workforce. And, today there really aren't very many rules anymore, or guidelines, or paths that were clear. I mean, I went into law, and, I didn't go directly out of college. I spent a few years I was in grad school, and then I worked in medicine for a little bit. And, then I went to law school and practiced law for 20 years, and then left and became a consultant and have been doing that for 25. So, but in law, there was a certain path that was easy to follow. You would get into some sort of practice, and even though you might change and go to a different firm or go to work for a business or a corporation or something, or go into government service, you were basically using the same skills, and you first would think of yourself as a lawyer. Today, you talk to, I don't know how many people who are in doing all kinds of things in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and I can't tell you how many of them are former lawyers who have found a different passion.
Right.
And some of them had happened young, and some of it had happened later. But the idea of finding a calling is wonderful when it happens to you, but it might happen to you at different ages, different points of your life, different circumstances. And so the fact is people make a lot of changes in the work that they do over their lifetimes today.
That's cool, and I think it's exciting if you can have more than one calling and you can experience so many different things. It's like we were talking about, planning a vacation, right? To me, that's the thing about life, is having these different experiences, and if you can do it in the workforce while having some longevity too, because you have to build your career, right? I think that is an amazing thing to do. And it's interesting to me with, you're talking about lawyers, having these different careers. My experience of doing Big Blend Radio for, I don't know how many, years now, 10, 12, 13 years, and all the interviews, I have to tell you, lawyers are writers. That's
they're the
right.
written word.
Yeah. I'm just going to say,
and what they write is law.
And just about every lawyer I've said, if you're going to do a different career, writer, So it's a very interesting thing about that. But going in some of the books you've done before and some of your work, you seem to work towards really helping women a lot. And I think that is also a huge strength about retirement, because women go through the motherhood side a lot of times. There's the family side. Sometimes caregiver, maybe not children, but other family members. Career and then retirement is this whole, there's the empty nest syndrome as well. So I think the retirement planning for a woman is interesting. Going through your book, I almost feel like, a couple should each have their own book, you know what I mean, and then get together. You know what I mean? That would
be great. Everybody buy two.
Sales.
Two sales. Right. No, I totally... I encourage couples to work together. And I think that's something that, to my surprise, doesn't always happen. Even when somebody decides, I better start planning for what I'm going to do, they may go off on their own and suddenly come and say, hey, honey, guess what I've got planned. It's always a surprise to me that there isn't a mutual engagement in this and a focus on working through this together right from the beginning. But people have different kinds of relationships. And so in the book, I say, work on it by yourself. There are some exercises where I encourage you to work on it with a spouse. But even if you decide to do it entirely by yourself, at some point you have to bring in your spouse, because whatever you decide is going to impact him or her.
Absolutely.
And both of you are going to be affected, and it's going to change. It may not have a major change on the relationship, but your life is going to change. Your patterns are going to change. The responsibilities and the expectations are going to change when suddenly, you never saw each other during the day, and now one or both of you are hanging around.
Yeah.
And,
that
can create a lot of tension.
Well, this brings me. I know tomorrow's show we're going to be dealing about like how to deal with your, significant other in the same house suddenly, and they could be getting on your nerves. But the thing is, it brings me to this whole coronavirus situation. Some people's lives right now, their retirement may just come a little earlier. I know some are small businesses looking at, or they're looking at, okay, well, this has almost killed me, you know what I mean, business-wise. Or businesses shifted in the career that they're in is going to change, and maybe the younger people are getting it, the job instead of them, or there's a shift. No matter how we look at it, this is shifting everything.
There's always a shift.
So with this pandemic, I've seen on Facebook from good friends, some people I just know out there talking about, well, I may just take an early retirement, and I go, and it's kind of like sad, but then maybe it's not. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like people are looking at that right now, depending on age and career and their situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the important thing here is not to retire with a feeling of resignation. I just have to get out, or now's the time to get out. The reason I wrote this book is because it's extremely hard to give up the career that has meant so much and been such a part of your life for so long, unless you have something to look forward to. It shouldn't be seen as an end. And when it is, it makes you feel like things are over. That's the whole concept of retirement, is such a negative term. In Spanish, the term is also, can be the term that can be used is jubilación, jubilation, right? It's a period of joyfulness. You're suddenly free to do other things.
Exactly.
The golden years.
No, I love
and
it.
So, whether they're golden or silver or whatever they are,
the shackles are off. Do what you want.
The whole idea is that you want to be looking forward to something, and so I hope that this workbook helps people envision what those possibilities might be, and then to start creating a plan for their own retirement, not what somebody is telling them it ought to be, but what would be meaningful for them, what would be enjoyable, what would give them what they need to lead, the life that they want. And so, I think a lot of people are, with people in isolation and work drying up and some people being furloughed or laid off or losing their jobs altogether, it's such a hard time. And while you don't necessarily ever want to be in a position where you're leaving because it's out of your control, sometimes it is. And so you want to take back as much control as you can over the narrative. And the narrative can be, yes, I think I'm going to retire either today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But when I retire, I'm going to retire in order to. And then you've got something that allows you to look forward.
Yeah.
People come into this earth with plenty of skills. They just have to discover them on their path. And, and when roadblocks come, and that's when you discover you have a talent to overcome that roadblock. And you shouldn't forget that you have these talents. And there's way more than one or two or three or four or five. There's many talents. Everybody has talents. So and you might discover where your passion lies in another talent in what you do every day from 9 to 5 or whatever your work day is. And you should never put your passion. You can, I have to work here for now, but you should never forget the passion that you have, because that's, for me, I have to say, that's the thing that's going to put you out there later when the 9 to 5 goes away.
Mhm.
And so you should always work on that passion.
Well, and if
if
you've had to keep that passion kind of in the background because you had to make a living,
right?
You know,
you don't
I mean, what better time than during your retirement to revisit it?
Right.
Exactly.
And you might not have to do it with all the strings attached. It could be a docent at a museum that you're passionate about this specific
Exactly.
thing. You know, it could be gardening, or, you know, you couldn't do all that then, but maybe you don't need to do the whole business around it, or maybe you do. Maybe you do open a business. Maybe it's a nonprofit. Maybe it could be anything, right? Depending
I look at
on
it
situation.
as freedom.
Yeah, you know, I think that's what I really love about your book is it's retirement by design. It's the most perfect title. And then you talk about it, this is what's really cool. It's design thinking. And I love this. I'm all about how do we think? How do we process things?
Yeah.
Do we take the time to think? Because it's like focus. And I think that's the other part that's so cool about your book is that it's a workbook. So if you're just reading, we're going to drift off, right? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, self-help books. Here, do this, this, this. They're telling you what to do, but there's no activity to it. You need the activity to engage, and that's what I really, really love. You talk about mind mapping. Nancy and I have done a little bit of that, and it's always fun. I appreciate a lot of what you've put into it, but you talk about design thinking, and you have your different, principles. Empathy. You talk about define, ideate, prototype, and test. So can we talk about these principles? Because I think this is the key elements of your book. These are, I should say.
Sure. I mean, the reason I use that approach is because I think most of us in many, many disciplines are taught to solve problems by setting goals and then coming up with a set of action steps to bring us toward those goals. It's a very linear process.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at something like retirement, it's open-ended. We don't know how much time we're going to have. We don't know a lot of things, but we can focus on the things that are important and that we want to include in our plan. And so this is a much more creative approach because, if we take a look at these 5 steps, they have titles, but basically the idea of empathy is that you start by saying, what's important to me? Now, if I'm an expert working with you and I'm using my expert hat, I say, well, it's important for you to do X, and so this is how you ought to be looking at how to get to X. But if I start thinking about what is it that's important, I have to start asking questions, and I have to ask about you. And I'll give you an example of the best example I've heard was from a designer of MRI machines in hospitals. He was an engineer who designed these very complicated pieces of equipment. And one time he went to the launch of one of his MRIs at one of these machines, and it was in a pediatric hospital, and a child was walking down the hallway with her parents and looked at this room with the machine and started to cry. And he looked at the machine and he said, to my eyes, this was the most beautiful machine imaginable. It was a perfect machine. But the user, the person I should be concerned with, is the child who has to go into that machine, and it's terrifying to her. Yep. So he went back, and the machine itself didn't change. What he changed was the environment, so that they made it look like a pirate ship, and the floor was painted like water, and they put up a pirate flag, and it made it a much more comfortable environment for a child. And so that's the idea: is that it's not just a matter of getting everything correct and accurate and beautifully designed. The idea is to make sure that whatever you come up with meets the needs of the user. And when we're talking about retirement, the user happens to be you. right? And to the
like
extent that other people are in your life and part of it and rely on you, like your spouse, like your children, they need to be included in that too. But you start out by saying, what is important to me? And that's another reason I used a workbook approach, because I know the things that would be important to me in my retirement, and I know the things I read about in other books that tell me the things that are important. But I don't know what's important to everybody who reads this. And so I wanted everyone to have a chance to personalize this so that what they come up with is what's important and meaningful and happy for them.
And you can use different colors.
Exactly, as many as you want.
I know,
and
that's the thing,
I encourage
so
Post-its and crayons and markers and all of that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. You used to get books like you must do this by this date, this, that, and it gets drilled into you that I think even, and I'm going to say the younger generation is going to say, mm-mm. And I think that's part of the hugest problem of retirement is the younger generation doesn't want to hear about it a long time. I know my generation, you talk about retirement, hey, we're just turning 21 and having fun and working our butts off at school or a new job or whatever. And you're going to tell me, like, now I need to think about when I'm going to be 60, 65, 70, whatever the year was. And
be careful.
Yeah, the retirement age is all different. But it would be like, hey, I'm not going to care about this, and it's not fun to think about because it was like,
I have
now.
some news for you then.
Uh-oh.
Because what I have found is that, and it was a surprise to me, but it makes sense. I have found that young people are far more interested in planning for their retirement than you or I probably. Because remember when I was talking earlier about how when I started out there was a clear path. There was also a pretty much sense of some security.
Right.
Today young people know there is no security.
Yeah.
They don't know if they'll even have Social Security. They don't know if they'll never have pensions. They have to take care of themselves for their entire lifetimes. They can't rely on safety nets that may not be there. And so, we may see some changes politically because of this, because of what they're going through and the way they see the world. But whatever it is, I think they're much more concerned about this than I expected when I started looking into these things. I don't know if you're familiar with a movement called FIRE. Have you looked at that at all?
Was it FIRE?
Yes. It stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Yes. Now, there's a lot of people doing that. Then they did create a new startup.
That's right. But the fact is they get out of traditional jobs and they live very frugally and they save their money and they invest in income-producing assets so that it gives them the independence not to have to rely on other people, and they can live the way they want to live. And then at some point they might start a company or they may, take a job or something. But the part of that is that same sense of I can't rely on some outside forces, other people and other institutions to take care of me.
I really want to point out, I really, really have to point out that Social Security and pensions these are not freebie donations to poor people. These are people who have worked and part of their paycheck went into that fund to give it back later. But so I really, really need to point that out because seriously, the idea that you're on Social Security and so you're begging to the government to give you something, to give back what they took.
Well, I hope you don't. I hope you didn't misunderstand. That is not at all what I was.
We always just have to say it. But
because a lot of people feel like you're sucking off the government, and it is so not true. In fact, if Social Security wasn't there and people didn't pay into the government, we wouldn't have one. Which could be
I think what young people are worried about is that by the time they get to the point, because they're contributing, they're still contributing even when they're if they're earning anything on their own, but they're worried that they can't. That isn't going to be enough 50 years from now when they're in their 70s for them to rely on or live on.
No.
I mean, today it's not enough for a lot of people to live on, no matter how much they've contributed.
Absolutely not. Look how many people are retired and working at Walmart as greeters. That's and I think that, again, I go back to why this is so important, what you're doing, and it's like, hey, we can do more than that. And I look at this. Nancy goes off on the Social Security thing, and I go, hey, I'm tired of paying into it. I want to take control over that, that money. So I think we're in that weird. When you look at all our different age groups, right? It's a very interesting thing, and retirement is a big, big deal, and because we are living longer. So we talk about empathy, and then you jump into now definition. Ooh. And really getting that focus.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back. It gets rid of. It helps you. This stage of definition helps you identify the things that are most important. What are the values that are the most important to you? Which ones have you been able to express all through your life? Which ones have you not been able to fully express? What assumptions are you making unconsciously, perhaps, about what it means to be retired? Are you continuing to work because you have to, because it's your passion, or because you think you should? Are you afraid that your life will become meaningless if you do retire, or that you won't be seen as making valuable contributions to the world? What are the assumptions that might be affecting your decisions? And then kind of exploring those, challenging them to see which ones really should be included and which ones you should work with as you go forward. And then, the fun part, ideation is the fun part. That's sort of brainstorming. Given that
I wanted to go back on the definition part,
ahead.
because I wanted to touch back on, I had a friend, and she really needed to retire. I mean, health-wise, mentally, and I'm going to just kind of zoom back. Nancy and I, in previous careers, actually taught retirees how to play music and musical organs, and it was a really cool program that helped people. They would retire, be senior, and suddenly they had that gap. That's why we really identify with your book of, oh my God, I'm retired, now what? And then they got to play music in an easy way. We watched folks go from not being able to move their hands from a stroke to being able to use their hands. We watched senior, I'm sorry, I don't even want to say the words, but senior citizens go in from retirement and maybe lose a loved one, totally spin out of control, become alcoholics, and watch them, just by having the joy of music, kind of go away from the alcoholism side. So this is why I think your book is so important. But also, this one friend of ours really did actually get on the alcoholic side because she couldn't get her mind to retire because she felt no one would care, because her business, her part in her career was she was in communication level in hospitality, and everybody, she had this persona, and she couldn't let it go to retire and realize, well, you could volunteer, you could do. So when you talk about defining, when you were talking about what are people thinking of your place, it really goes back to this one lady and her life. The retirement part, really, it spiraled out of control and has not gone in a positive way. So that's why I really wanted to just circle back on that, because understanding what's important doesn't mean you have to stay where you are, but defining it, right? And then going into what you were saying, brainstorming, but you can change. But you can still have that like she could have stayed and she could have changed careers or volunteered or done something different and still kept in touch with people, right? Instead of spiraling out of control.
You point out a couple of very important things. This last comment about she could have stayed in touch with people. Isolation is a critical problem. We see that today because everyone is isolated to some extent. But people who are retired and isolated under normal circumstances, that's one of the most devastating problems. Because it takes a great toll emotionally, physically, on your health and your well-being in so many ways. And it's also one of the reasons. I mean, I encourage people. The first chapter in the book is about having a personal advisory team, making sure that you stay in touch with people and that you talk through some of the issues that come up to you as you work through the book. I did a presentation one time just before we had to stop meeting with people, and a couple of people in the group came up to me afterwards and made me so happy. They told me they had just met, but they were going to each work independently and get together once a month for the next year or longer to work through what they were dealing with, what they were finding as they worked through the workbook.
That's so cool.
And I love that because the whole, you can do that with 2 people, with 10 people. I wouldn't go, more than 10. Probably that's too many. Probably, 5 or 6 people. But to talk on a regular basis, because this, aside from just the adjustment to not working all the time, full time, full stop, the way you have been, one of the big problems is the sense of loss of both identity and relationships. You have communities at work. Even when you're working remotely, there are people you interact with regularly, and suddenly they're gone. And when you look at who you are and how you see yourself, that changes. Even if you think you're accustomed to it, a couple of months go by, and you find that it's not as easy as you thought to see yourself in a different way. You're the same person. You haven't changed as a person, but people perceive you differently once you say, I'm retired, or I used to. That's why I included an exercise for a new elevator speech. Saying, when people say to you, what do you do? Because they often do that. Instead of saying, I used to do this, or I'm a former, or I'm a retired, how are you going to present yourself in a way that sounds positive and forward-looking?
How about they change the word from retire, like you're tired, we're now tired. How about we're free?
Yeah, you can call it.
They need to
the thing is, believe me, everybody who writes in this area or talks about it is looking for new terminology.
Change the word.
Retirement is it doesn't even count much as a word today because so few people just retire cold turkey. I mean, they just stop and they don't do anything else.
Retire sounds like a flat tire.
Yeah, and it means withdrawal. It means going to sleep.
So let's change the word.
Yeah, but even if we keep it, we can give it a new meaning, and we can talk about next stages, next this, next. I mean, there are certain categories. There's the next group, and there's the something, rewire, refire, redefine. All of that. Renew. Loads of books with all of those titles and people talking about them that way, and that's all cool. I mean, everybody is struggling to come up with a new way of talking about it, but the idea is really what matters here, and that's about having something you really want to look forward to.
And getting in, I think that's what I like about the brainstorming part of this, is then you start to claim. So like when you're defining things, there is that lost part, like I was talking about our one friend, and then when you start brainstorming, don't you find more hope and you start, now it's active. The ideation.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun. And one idea leads to another. And, that's why at some point when you have loads of ideas, you want to start filtering them. And because at some point, I mean, I like the idea, and I encourage people to go into this next stage, which is prototyping, which just means try it out. If and that includes, you were talking about what a beautiful area you're in right now, and what's happening in real estate. A lot of people, when they leave work and retire, they want to move somewhere else. And I think, that's great as long as you go through the process of making your decisions, realizing the pros and cons. And I encourage people, if you can, go down to Joshua Tree, go down to, 29 Palms, and spend some time there and see not just how it's like as a vacation or a couple of or a week away, but how would it be like to move there before you actually sell your house, put all your belongings in a van and move? It's the same thing when people move because they want to be closer to their families, their children and grandchildren, which of course is wonderful. But at the same time, if you're moving to be with them, make sure they're going to be there. Everybody is so mobile. What if they move again because they get transferred for work? Are you going to pick up and move again?
Exactly. A lot of times I think we do things on a whim, and change. Nancy and I both know we've changed so much. We've lived in different countries, and gone from print to digital. And every time you make a change, and I think that's part of this right now when we talk about coronavirus and we're all sheltered in place. It's a good time to actually pick up pen and paper and do these exercises. But I think that change, every time there's a change, there is cost involved. So if you just go, oh, that's it, I'm going to go off here on a whim, the chances are it's going to cost you double, right? In the end.
Oh, sure. But, even if you're willing to bear the cost, there are other things. Like, are your kids going to be the center of your life?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever lived in this community before? Do you have any other ties? Because you can get there and make them crazy if your life revolves around them and they're not ready for it. There are a lot of factors, and so I would never discourage people from going, but I think what I do is give them a lot of questions to ask themselves before they make a commitment. And that's why this whole notion of prototyping or trying something out whenever you can, even if you do it in a small way, moving for a month or at an off part of the, if you're trying to go someplace fabulous and you've only been there during tourist season, what's it like there when it's cold and bleak and nobody's around? Trying things out if you can. Obviously, when we talk about travel and living somewhere else right now, anything sounds pretty good, but before you make a big move, you want to have at least have thought it through, and then as you test these various things, that's where your goals might come in. You might. That's why instead of, as I said, the goal focus, where you start with the goal and then you take your steps toward it, I like the idea of the goals kind of evolving out of all the things you've tried out and thought about and learned about, and then using a calendar to make your plans.
Yeah, and you were talking about having a group, and I think right now we're getting so virtual, especially now during this virus shut-in, that with Zoom and FaceTime and things like that. Are you doing like book groups and things like that? Where you're talking to groups at all?
Yeah, I'm on FaceTime and Zoom all the time. I'd be very happy to start a group or a couple of groups with small numbers of people, and have been just starting to test the waters about doing that around issues of retirement. Most of the things that I'm doing now, some of them have to do with retirement, but a lot of them have about other things. But I think if there were interest in a leader-led group, a facilitated group, to do that online, this is a perfectly natural topic to look at.
I think it's great, and I think it's true I like the community aspect of it. Obviously not everyone's going to share bank accounts and things like that, but it's this idea of mind mapping, and I think it helps you when you have a team that's, hey, we're going to work on this exercise today, and what did we learn about ourselves? Because, again, like we were saying, we're going through so many different cycles now with longevity, but it's a fantastic book, and we appreciate you joining us on the show today. My gosh, I know we could just go off for an hour and 2 hours on this because it's such a big topic, and I think it's important that we do look at it because it's so easy to kind of go, oh, well, I'll just see what happens when I get there, and and then you're defining yourself a good life, and you talk about purpose, and I love that. So everyone, again, the book is by Ida O. Abbott, O being her middle initial, and it's Retirement by Design, a guided workbook for creating a happy and purposeful future, and you can get it through Ulysses Press. Hey, we love Ulysses, right? That's one of my favorite songs from
Yeah.
Queen. But also go to her website, idaabbott.com. You're on Facebook as well and Twitter. And what's the best place for people to reach out for you social media-wise?
Well, probably on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And, or through my website, idaabbott.com. And, the book's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Pals and all the, the online booksellers.
Yeah, and ask your local, bookseller to get it. That's the other thing, too. Ask them locally as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and thank you so much both for this wonderful interview, but also for your interest in this field and letting people know that there are resources out there for them.
Thank you. Oh, you bet. It's important. We appreciate it and appreciate what you've done. It's a masterpiece, Ida.
You're so kind. Thank you very, very much.
You take care and stay safe.
Take care.
You too. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.